Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The UK would not hesitate to launch more secret drone strikes in Syria to stop potential terror plots. The words of the Defence Secretary Michael Fallon as the government comes under increasing pressure to give more details of the RAF strike which killed two British Islamic State jihadists, Riyad Khan and Ruhul Amin, in the town of Raqqa last month. MPs rejected UK military action in Syria 2 years ago, and ministers are now facing questions over the attack and calls to publish the legal advice. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
Unmanned, lethal and controversial, Khan and Ruhul Amin were both killed by a British drone strike. Here the government says it acted in self-defence and it would do it again.
Our job is to keep the streets of Britain safe, and if we are aware of future attacks and if there's no other way of preventing them, then absolutely, yes, we have to do what's necessary.
The drones are operated from an RAF base in Lincolnshire, thousands of miles from their target. This RAF drone strike throws up a number of important questions. Was it legal? Was it moral? And in the long term, is this policy even effective? But the question that a lot of people now want answered is what exactly was the secret intelligence on Riyad Khan that caused the government to abandon its long-standing opposition to targeted killings and embark on this action in a country where Britain is not even officially at war. Islamic State fighters are spread across Syria and Iraq. Normally, British forces are only authorised to carry out armed actions against them in Iraq. But intelligence gathering goes on in both countries around the clock. Much of it is done by GCHQ, the government listening station in Cheltenham. Together with its US counterpart, the NSA, it tries to intercept terrorist communications and locate where they're coming from. Down on the streets of Raqqa, the IS base in Syria, it's likely that human informants are also being used, tipping off intelligence agencies when operatives are moving. Was it legal for Britain to then act on that in the way it did?
The Attorney General will have advised the Prime Minister that it was lawful for an attack of this kind to take place because there was a present, imminent and real threat to either British people within the United Kingdom or British people and British assets abroad.
A close friend of one of the British jihadists killed in the drone strike agrees.
Feel more sympathy towards his family than I do for him personally. At the end of the day, whether he was radicalised or brainwashed, whatever you want to call it, he still made the decision to get on that plane and go over to Syria, and he knew what he was getting into, so I can't have sympathy for him, I'm afraid.
The public debate over RAF drone strikes is set to continue, because as long as violent British jihadists are active in the Middle East, there's a possibility more such actions will follow. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is in Westminster. I mean, how likely is an inquiry into this?
Well, there's no doubt there are mounting calls for some sort of formal inquiry. Why? Well, because this does seem to mark a sea change moment in our approach to IS and Syria, both legally and militarily, because although Mr. Cameron insists this was an act of self-defence, it is nevertheless the first time the British state has sanctioned the assassination of British citizens when we're not at war, and in Syria when Parliament has explicitly not given the government approval to militarily intervene inside Syria. And therefore we're seeing calls from both the Labour Party and the Scottish National Party for Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee to begin a formal investigation. Now, they would have the power to summon security chiefs and to demand to see intelligence briefings. The response of ministers, it has to be said, has been one of defiance, insisting that the drone strike was, quotes, a perfectly legal act, and that they would do the same again if they were able to identify other IS terror suspects who seem poised to carry out attacks in Britain. And the reason I think ministers are defiant is not just because they believe they are in the right. It is because they believe public opinion is also on their side and that people are perfectly relaxed about drones being used to take out IS terrorists.
Norman, thank you. Norman Smith. European commissioners are meeting to finalise plans to relocate 160,000 refugees in more than 20 countries across the EU. Germany's Vice-Chancellor says his country can cope with taking 500,000 refugees a year for the foreseeable future. The UNHCR says aid agencies in the Middle East are at their wits' end as they struggle to cope with the rising number of Syrian refugees. It comes as thousands more migrants continue to flood into mainland Europe. Ben Brown is in Munich.
Yes, Simon, many of those migrants and refugees coming in through Munich railway station here behind me, and many of them are children, of course, and aid agencies are now warning that across Europe, thousands of unaccompanied minors are separated from their families and urgently need to be cared for, as I've been finding out. There's no end in sight to the influx here. These children have their parents with them, but many thousands do not. They've got separated from their families in the chaos of the journey, or in the countries they came from, war zones like Syria and Iraq. Jafar travelled here from Afghanistan with relatives, but at the Austrian border he got split up from his cousins and his little brother, 6-year-old Zabi, and now he's desperately trying to find him. Firuza is also from Afghanistan. She told me she lost her son and grandson as she travelled through Europe.
All we've known is misery. When will our country be safe to live in again? We've had 20, 30 years of war. When will it be over?
For these migrants, the dream of reaching Germany has finally come true. And yet for many, their new life here is shrouded in uncertainty. And they're reluctant to register as asylum seekers in one particular town or city until they found their missing relatives, who may be in an entirely different part of the country. This is where some of the lost children are looked after, a care home in Munich run by the aid agency Caritas. They're taught German to prepare for their new lives here, but many are deeply traumatized.
Our youngest boys are 13 in the moment, and sometimes they cry at night, sometimes they are very tired or go to sleep. Sometimes they play and have fun, it's different, and sometimes they are very angry to be here. They like to be at home with mom and dad and her cousins.
The refugees are beginning their new lives here, but for some, until they've been reunited with their loved ones, their journey won't be over. Well, many of the refugees and migrants here are from Syria. The United Nations now, in fact, says that Syria is the biggest exporter of refugees in the world. About half the pre-war population of Syria has either fled the country or been displaced within it. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen has been to the military hospital at Latakia, part of the Assad territory still held by the Assad regime.
This is the orthopedic surgery ward at Latakia Military Hospital. Latakia on the Mediterranean coast is one of the key areas for President Assad's support. This is a very busy place. The hospital director told me that on the very toughest days they can receive more than 200 military casualties here. Of that, 10, 15, up to 25% can die. Now, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is one of the organizations that keeps the grisly toll of what's been happening in Syria, says that in 4+ years of war, around 80,000 Syrian soldiers have been killed. Now, as well as the dead, there are, of course, many people who've had life-changing injuries, most of them young men, and on any given day, there are an awful lot of them in this hospital. It's not just the killing, there's also the movement of people caused by war. It's posing a series of challenges that will go on probably for years, because the war has a lot of violence, a lot of killing left in it. And it's not just the war in Syria. There are wars as well in Libya and Iraq and in Yemen and other civil conflicts as well. The Middle East is knocking loudly on Europe's doors, and it's not going to go away. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Latakia.
Well, now across Europe, thousands of migrants are queuing outside registration centres to get the necessary paperwork to continue their journeys through Europe. Our correspondent James Reynolds has been to Presevo on the Serbia-Macedonia border, to a main transit camp there for migrants.
This is the long line of refugees and migrants here
in the Serbian border town of Preševo. A lot of these people have just got here from Macedonia, and they've been waiting, some of them overnight, in this line in order to get into a Serbian registration or processing centre. They've got to get into this centre because they need papers. Serbia says that everyone here has to have proper transit or travel papers in order to continue their journey. So they wait in this long line, then they'll get in the centre, and then once they've been processed, they'll be screened, they'll be given papers, and they'll come out the other side with white bits of paper, official Serbian government bureaucracy, and that collection of papers will allow them to continue their journey north, first of all towards Belgrade, and then, in their hope and expectation, towards the Hungarian border and the beginning of the EU's border-free zone.
Welcome to Schengen, right in the heartland of the European Union. And if you want to come this way, I'll give you some idea of the geography. Right now we're in Luxembourg, and you look over the other side of the Mosel River. On the left, that's Germany, and then over here on the right, that's France. It's a pretty unremarkable place, really, but it was here that the idea of a Europe free of internal border control, something many people see as one of the EU's greatest achievements, it was here that it all began. 26 countries are now part of this rather unique experiment. Anyone can cross internal borders that have, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. But the huge influx of migrants and the EU's confused response has put Schengen under the spotlight as never before. Inside the museum there are all sorts of memories and reminders of European integration, landmark moments, including this video of the signing of the Schengen Agreement, which took place on the river just outside, on the border between three countries, exactly 30 years ago. Up on the wall there's a quote which sums up what Schengen is supposed to be about. The elimination of borders recognises the fact that all citizens belong to the same space and share the same identity. But it's that kind of idea of solidarity that has come under threat in recent weeks. Hassle-free travel, crossing borders without any checks, it's something many Europeans now take for granted, unlike almost anywhere else in the world. But the current migrant crisis is putting all that under intense pressure. Politicians from Angela Merkel on down say something has to change. And if it doesn't, then the basic principles represented by a place like this will be called into question.
Well, Chris is now in Strasbourg, where European commissioners are meeting to discuss this whole migrant crisis that is sweeping Europe. Chris, what are they planning to do about it?
Well, you've heard the top line already, Ben, which is to try and relocate 160,000 of the most recently arrived refugees who've come to the countries that they first arrived in. That's Greece, Italy and Hungary, basically, and relocate those people to 22 other countries across the EU. Britain, of course, is exempt from that scheme because it doesn't take part in justice and home affairs policy in that way. The trouble is there are big countries like France and Germany who are very much in favour of this scheme and in favour of mandatory quotas. Other countries, notably in Eastern Europe, who are very much opposed. It could well be that one compromise is that countries who refuse to take part will in effect have to pay a fine. They will have to pay other countries to take refugees and look after them. But that's only one part of what's being planned, because if you look at the entries into the people claiming asylum in Germany, for example, this year, about 20% of them are from Syria, which is not unexpected. But even more than that are from countries like Albania, Serbia, from Kosovo, in the Balkans, people whose asylum applications will probably be rejected because they are really looking for a better life. They're economic migrants. And so there are also plans underway to make sure those people whose claims are rejected are fast-tracked back for deportation back to their home countries. So it's a combination of showing solidarity with those who are genuinely fleeing from persecution, but making sure there are more effective systems in place in the long term to send back those who really aren't fleeing from war or persecution in that way.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Chris Morris reporting there. Well, the refugees and migrants arriving here in Munich have had a warm welcome. But there has been some surprise, perhaps, at those comments from the Vice-Chancellor of Germany saying that Germany could actually take as many as 500,000 refugees every year for the next few years. A staggering number. Simon, back to you.
Ben, thank you very much. Ben Brown. A 21-year-old man has been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Irish student Karen Buckley. Alexander Pacto admitted strangling the 24-year-old and beating her to death with a spanner before hiding her body in a barrel on a farm near Glasgow. He'll serve a minimum of 23 years. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon reports from the High Court in Glasgow.
Alexander Pacto, a murderer who targeted a defenceless young woman and who went to shocking lengths to cover up his crime. The 21-year-old has never offered any rational explanation for what he did.
Court.
In his sentencing, which was televised, the judge said Pacto had carried out a brutal, senseless and motiveless attack.
Your killing of this young woman, combined with the extraordinary lengths to which you went to cover it up, display the actions of a callous and calculating man. And it is difficult, in my view, to envisage someone who's truly sorry for killing another human being, going to the lengths to which you went to cover up your appalling crime.
Karen Buckley had only been living in Glasgow for a few months. She'd been with friends at this nightclub when she disappeared. Pacto had met her on her way home, offered her a lift and then murdered her in his car. He then tried to cover up his crimes, hiding the 24-year-old's body at this farm on the outskirts of the city.
I met her outside the sanctuary.
Pacto concocted a story to tell police. Their investigation into the young student's murder made more difficult by the killer's repeated lies. Karen Buckley's family were in court to hear her murderer sentenced to a minimum of 23 years in jail. In a statement, they said, "Today's life sentence will not bring our beautiful Karen back. Our little angel has been taken from us in the cruelest of ways. We mourn for her every day." Karen Buckley came from a very close-knit family. Today they called her killer a truly evil coward and said they hope he will spend every day in prison haunted by what he did. Lorna Gordon, BBC News at the High Court in Glasgow.
It's coming up to 1:20. Our top story this lunchtime. The government defends the drone attacks which killed 2 British jihadists in Syria. And still to come, it's secret, top secret. We now know who's going to sing the next James Bond theme, but we don't know how it goes.
Coming up in sports at past, Andy Murray stunned at the US Open. The world number 3 loses in 4 sets to South Africa's Kevin Anderson. It's the earliest exit for Murray in a Grand Slam in 5 years.
Fantastic match. A British missionary to El Salvador who believes his child was deliberately swapped at birth has been reunited with his son. Richard Cushworth, who is from Bradford, and his Salvadorian wife, had DNA tests carried out to prove that the child they'd been given in May was not biologically theirs. Andy Moore's report contains some flash photography.
A tender kiss for his own child after being separated for more than 3 months. British-born Richard Cushworth and his Salvadoran wife, Mercedes Casanella, claimed they were the victims of child traffickers. This is what he said before a court imposed a gagging order.
It's a horrible situation for me, for her, for my family, her family. A child is an experience you have for a lifetime. They give you grandchildren. I mean, this is a lifelong injury that's very, very deep, and it's horrible.
When Mercedes first delivered her baby, she said he was fair-skinned with features like his father's. But the baby she was given the next day and took home to the States was much darker-skinned. After DNA tests, there was a court case. Here the mother, Mercedes, is confronting the doctor. She tries to grab the sheet covering him, crying out, "Where is my son?" El Salvador's Attorney General has confirmed the babies were somehow given to the wrong parents.
We returned the babies to the legitimate parents. That makes us very happy because we at the Attorney General's office are really moved when we see how many children are torn from their homes.
The question now is whether criminal activity was involved. The accused doctor has been told he can't leave the country, but he has his supporters.
The crime which Dr. Guido Reyes is accused of cannot have been made by him for the following reason. When an obstetrician performs a normal or C-section childbirth, the newborn is immediately given to the paediatrician and the nurses in the delivery room.
The Cushworth's biological child has now been returned to them. The investigation into how and why he was taken away is ongoing. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Retail sales in August were down 1%, one of the worst performances in more than a year. Sales of clothing, footwear and furniture were all down on the same time last year, the fall blamed on the wet weather. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
In August, it was wet, 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 from the northwest to the southeast, as if we need reminding. Turns out it was a bit of a washout on the high street as well.
What we've seen is clothing sales are down, particularly back to school. Larger value items like furniture and electricals are also down. But the big thing that's impacted this month's figures is the timing.
In other words, the bank holiday, big days for shopping, came late this year. 2 of those days will be counted in September's figures, impacting last month's numbers. August was a disappointing month for retailers. Even online sales growth slowed. But there's plenty of other evidence to suggest that consumers were splashing out, just not here on the high street. We piled into car showrooms. August saw sales of new vehicles up by nearly 10% on the year. August was a record breaker for EasyJet. It saw a surge of late bookings as people took off to escape the rain. And for those that stayed at home, we treated ourselves too.
Consumers have been spending at the highest levels we've seen in 6 years in terms of recreation and culture. That means family days out, trips to the cinema, and also spending in pubs and restaurants up and down the country.
Retailers are hoping for a bounce back in September. Autumn-winter 15, that's the focus now. The most important months of trading for our high streets. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
There's been another fall in China's trade with the rest of the world. It shrank by nearly 10% in August compared with a year ago. The figures have raised concerns about the health of the world's second largest economy and its contribution to global growth. A former Church of England bishop has pleaded guilty to 2 offences of indecent assault and 1 of misconduct in public office. Peter Ball, who's 83, appeared by a video link at the Old Bailey and admitted abusing 2 young men in the early 1980s and early 1990s. He's also pleaded guilty to misconduct in a public office while Bishop of Lewis between 1977 and 1992. The court heard he misused his position and authority for his own sexual gratification. Now, the name's Smith, Sam Smith, and he's singing the theme tune for the next James Bond movie, Spectre. Recorded at the end of last year, the track is called Writings on the Wall and will be released later this month. Only last week, Smith denied his involvement with the 007 project, admitting this morning that keeping the secret had been a top-secret mission of his own. Lisa Mazimba reports.
Oh, won't you stay with me? His distinctive vocals and soulful lyrics have helped make him one of music's biggest stars. Now, one of cinema's biggest franchises has chosen him to perform the title song for the next James Bond film, Spectre.
I've been keeping this a secret for almost a year now, and today is the day when it's all come out, and I'm still trying to I find myself looking at the Wikipedia page of all the people who've ever sung the song, and I still can't believe that it's me that's doing it this year. It's amazing.
For more than half a century now, some of the most successful and popular performers of the age have recorded Bond themes. From Bassie to Le Bon, from Madonna to McCartney, to live and let die. Expectation is already huge for Sam Smith's so far unheard track from Spectre called Writings on the Wall, especially after the commercial and critical acclaim for the last Bond song, Skyfall by Adele. It won a Brit Award, a Grammy and an Oscar. Sam Smith's debut album sold more than 1 million copies on both sides of the Atlantic, as well as collecting multiple awards. The 007 team will be hoping his Bond theme will be just as successful. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
Tomorrow, the Queen will become the longest reigning monarch in British history, surpassing Queen Victoria's record of 63 years and 7 months on the throne. To mark that milestone, a set of remarkably candid photographs of the Queen taken by the royal photographer Lisa Sheridan are being published online by Getty Images. Roy Nikar reports.
Deep in this archive are images that have rarely seen the light of day. Snapshots from one of the most exclusive family albums.
These are very rare negatives from the Lisa Sheridan collection.
Playing in the garden at Windsor with her little sister and her dogs, a young Princess Elizabeth had no idea that her destiny was to become Queen. Lisa Sheridan was a pioneering photographer of her time, and from the 1930s until the 1960s, she was given rare access to the royal family at home. She produced relaxed, intimate portraits. They were a world away from the pomp and ceremony of the royal photography that had gone before.
And she looked really beautiful there.
Harry Benson has been photographing the Queen for nearly 50 years. So just how groundbreaking was Sheridan?
Lisa Sheridan will be remembered as a great photographer. I think a trailblazer. Yeah, you look back, as you say, I've always said, and the pictures take on a whole new meaning, and you look and you see, and there's information. That's photojournalism, it's information.
Now, in the dark room at Getty Images, Sheridan's pictures are being brought back to life. In a relationship lasting 4 decades, from behind her camera, Lisa Sheridan captured those rare, off-duty moments as Elizabeth changed from a young girl into a queen and the world's most recognised woman. Sheridan's granddaughter has letters and pictures showing her unique relationship with the Queen.
She didn't know what the badges were. She sent these photographs to the palace and she got a letter back saying, "I hope you will be able to make out the scribbles. Princess Elizabeth wrote them herself." They were at ease with each other and the respect was there, the trust was there. It was just an enjoyment of 2 women with 2 very difficult jobs to do, actually enjoying each other's company and succeeding in a world that wasn't quite ready for women, perhaps.
As these images finally emerge from the archives, they will shed fresh light on the role of the Queen as a daughter, wife, mother and monarch. Roya Nikar, BBC News.
Now, the weather, here is John Hammond.
Simon, it's proving very difficult, my job at the moment. Honestly, bear with me. But nailing down cloud and sunshine at the moment is proving rather problematical. For some of us, gorgeous sunshine out there once the fog has cleared. But for others, well, it's disappointingly grey and cool. There's been some spots of drizzle coming out of that cloud as well, despite the fact that on the face of it, it's all pretty straightforward with a large area of high pressure plonked on top of us. However, beneath that high pressure, we've got these areas of cloud floating around rather aimlessly. And yes, nailing down who's sunny and who's cloudy at the moment is difficult to say the least. So bear with us over the next couple of days. There will be a fair bit of uncertainty. Through this afternoon, west is best. Parts of Wales, southwest England, along the south coast too, some pleasant sunshine. Further north, though, into the Midlands, that grey low cloud hanging on in some places, keeping it quite cool up towards Yorkshire as well, east of the Pennines. Further north and west, improving, though, through the central belt. Hopefully that cloud will break up, some sunshine, improving too for Northern Ireland after a cloudy couple of days. In the best of the sunshine, nudging at 20 degrees or so. Now, overnight tonight, that cloud will begin to drift back westwards again on the breeze. The breeze actually will prevent too much in the way of fog forming. The temperature's not just as low as they have been, but 2 or 3 degrees again across the Highlands, perhaps parts of northwest England in rural areas. It could well be another murky old start again tomorrow where you are, but I'm hopeful the cloud will break up rather more in most places, and by the afternoon, a good few of us will see some reasonable spells of sunshine. Out of the breeze in the sunshine, feel very nice indeed. Again, low 20s possible in 1 or 2 places, potentially even warmer than that to come Thursday. We're going to be dragging in some warmer and drier air off the near continent, so hopefully plenty of sunshine around by then. Enjoy it while it lasts. Hopefully it will last into Friday as well, but looming on the horizon, big area of low pressure, and we all know what that means, don't we? That'll be heading in towards us through this weekend. So yes, dry until Friday for most of us. A few showers around, but it's really through this weekend. It turns increasingly unsettled, some wet weather, some pretty windy weather as well. Again, the timing of this breakdown is not nailed on for sure, but you get the gist, don't you? That low pressure taking over through this weekend, and eventually most of us will see some pretty heavy rain and some quite strong winds pushing southwest to northeast as we go through the weekend. For more information on the challenges of predicting cloud underneath areas of high pressure, check out the BBC Weather website, where Alex Deacon will have more detail.
John, thank you. That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good afternoon.
Andy Burnham, Yvette Cooper, Liz Kendall, or Jeremy Corbyn? After a fierce campaign, who will Labour choose as leader?
Labour leadership, the result. Saturday morning at 11 on the BBC News Channel.
The world's greatest half marathon, the Great North Run, Sunday at 9:30 on BBC One.
Hello, you're watching BBC News with Joanna Gosling. An update on our headlines just after 1:30. The SNP in Westminster is calling for a parliamentary investigation into the RAF drone strike which killed 2 British jihadists in Syria. The Defence Secretary said he would not hesitate to do it again.
If we are aware of future attacks and if there's no other way of preventing them, then absolutely, yes, we have to do what's necessary.
Germany's Vice-Chancellor says his country can cope with taking 500,000 refugees a year for the foreseeable future. More than 800,000 asylum seekers are expected to resettle in Germany this year alone. European commissioners are meeting to finalise plans to relocate 160,000 refugees in more than 20 countries across the EU. Here, MPs are debating Britain's contribution in the House of Commons. Alexander Pacto, the man who murdered the Irish student Karen Buckley during a night out in Glasgow, has been sentenced to life in prison. He faces a minimum of 23 years behind bars. Sam Smith has revealed he recorded the theme song for the new James Bond film Spectre. He described being part of the movie as one of the highlights of his career. Let's catch up with the sport. Jessica has it for us. Hi again.
Hello again, Joanna. Good afternoon. Andy Murray said it was disappointing to have ended his run of reaching 18 successive Grand Slam quarterfinals at the US Open. Murray was beaten over 4 sets by the big serving South African Kevin Anderson. The 15th seed won the first 2 sets, 7-6 and 6-3, before infuriating Murray by taking a 6-minute break. The world number 3 berated the umpire and soon after took it out on his racket, as you can see there, but it may have channeled his anger as he improved to win the 3rd set 7-6, but Anderson recovered to take the 4th, and with it, the match. He now faces 2-time major champion Stan Wawrinka in the last 8.
I felt like I had my opportunities there, but didn't manage to capitalise on them, and when you're playing against someone as good as him, you know, it's tough.
And Johanna Konta's remarkable 16-match winning run has ended after defeat to the 5th seed Petra Kvitova, also in the 4th round. She was beaten in straight sets, so her run in the tournament is over. And the 31-year wait for a British woman in a Grand Slam quarter-final continues. Konta is likely to move into the world top 60 and will collect a cheque for £141,000, 4 times her previous best. The pressure is building on Wales ahead of the Rugby Union World Cup, with first-choice scrum half Rhys Webb becoming the 2nd man ruled out of the tournament following his injury in their final warm-up match. Webb was taken off during the first half against Italy on Saturday with a foot injury. The Welsh Rugby Union has confirmed this morning that he won't recover in time, and along with the British and Irish Lion Lee Halfpenny, he leaves the squad to be replaced by Mike Phillips and Eli Walker. In cricket, England have won the toss and will bat first in the 3rd one-day international against Australia. The visitors are 2-0 up in the series, and if they win at Old Trafford today, they will take they will wrap up the series. England have one change in their team. Johnny Barstow comes in for wicketkeeper Jos Buttler, while Australia have made 3 changes with Patterson, Agar and Finch coming in. Australia have the chance for revenge on England, of course, for that Ashes defeat by clinching the series today. So, do England have enough depth to cover their one-day strengths as well? Director of Cricket Andrew Strauss says batsman Kevin Peterson still won't be called in to help.
I think the team's moved on and the team's in a pretty good place. I mean, some of those young guys have established themselves in the team. You look at Joe Root, you look at Ben Stokes, you look at Moeen Ali, for example. 3 guys that over the last 18 months have really come through and have the makings of top quality international players. And, that's what we'll be focusing on, trying to take English cricket forward.
Wayne Rooney says it would be fantastic if the current team were to become the first England side to win all their qualifiers to a European Championship. They play Switzerland tonight at Wembley, having already made it to France 2016. And Rooney needs 1 more goal to break Sir Bobby Charlton's England scoring record. So far, it's 7 wins out of 7 for England. Can they get 10 out of 10?
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. I think I'm not sure whether an England team's done that before. So for us, it's a target for us to win every game in this group, and that'll be something we can be proud of. Although a lot of the games, some of the games we were expected to win, but you'd have to go and do it and get the victory. So if we can do that, it'll be great for the team.
And that's all the sport for now. You can find more on all those stories on the BBC Sport website. That's bbc.co.uk/sport. And I'll have more in the next hour.
See you later. Thank you. Let's get more now on the killing of 2 British jihadists in Syria by an RAF drone strike. We can go live to Westminster and talk to the Labour MP for Birmingham, Edgbaston, Gisela Stewart. She was formerly on the Commons Defence Select Committee. Thank you very much for joining us. The Defence Secretary says he wouldn't hesitate to do it again. What do you think about this?
I've also this morning been meeting with some Syrians, and we talked about what can be done to put on a better defence. And we talked about such things as drone attacks and airstrikes. And it's quite clear that the processes which we have to go through in the United Kingdom to make sure that any action we authorise is properly authorised is one thing. But in terms of the effect it has on the ground, it clearly was the right thing to have done.
And why do you say that?
Because if we... in the current situation, we are dealing with a civil war in Syria. We also have got the players of ISIS, something that started as a civil war, ISIS coming in, huge tensions, flows of refugees. We will only resolve that if we help the elements of the Syrian population to regain control of their country again, and that requires intervention in terms of the airstrikes, but it's got to be targeted. One of the interesting things which came out of the meeting this morning is that the biggest complaint the Syrians have is that both the Assad regime but also ISIS are beginning to use chemical weapons again. Assad regime is using untargeted barrel bombs which just kill the civilian population. And if we can start to fight these forces, but in a very targeted way, then that surely must be the right way of going ahead.
So would you like there to be another parliamentary debate on authorising the use of British airstrikes in Syria and for that to go ahead?
I think we need the parliamentary debate which encapsulates both what the United Kingdom government's overall strategy to this problem is, because at the moment all we're hearing is piecemeal announcements which are informative but don't actually help us form a picture of how we can get properly involved. So the House of Commons, I think, will have to return to this sooner rather than later, and as part of that, the government explaining its strategy, it will have to also outline what they think the right military action is.
What do you think the right military action is?
Well, the Syrians today were quite clear that they thought that unless you started to create safe zones and started to look at no-fly zones in a strategic and coordinated way, so you almost form a bridgehead which allows you to move forward, we will not be able to deal with the problem in a long-term way.
George Osborne said previously that the decision previously by the House of Commons not to authorise the use of airstrikes over Syria is one of the worst decisions the House of Commons had ever taken. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with saying that it's about the worst occasion I have seen when a government started off making what to me was, to begin with, a valid case. But when it came to explaining to us as MPs in an emergency Friday, before the House would have come back on a Monday anyway, what the government's strategy was, they completely failed. So that even people like me, who were positive towards the overall process, were not convinced that the government had a strategy. So I think George Osborne is right. It is a pity that we ended up with that decision. But I would say it was firmly and squarely at the government's fault for not making a decent case.
Do you regret it now, though?
No, I don't regret it, because just going in for the sake of going in without knowing what the framework is not the right thing to do. Similarly now, when we discuss Syria, when we discuss the refugee problem, that whole crisis we are facing, we have to face up to the fact that there will be no quick solutions. There will have to be dialogue with Russia, for one thing, because they are a player which is by no means a very benign influence. And the government, and David Cameron in particular, will have to explain to us how he intends to tackle these things.
Gisela Stewart, thank you very much. A year ago today, a new organisation to regulate the press was set up. It's called IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, and it replaced the old press regulator after the Leveson inquiry into the practices and ethics of the British press following the News International phone hacking scandal. The actor and comedian Steve Coogan told the BBC's Victoria Derbyshire programme that the organisation was the same as the old one.
It's doing as much as it needs to do to appear to be compliant. There really is, most people who have been polled regard it as not effective. It actually, most people agree that the PCC that ran before was completely ineffective. It failed to spot the hacking scandal at all, and actually the new body is more or less the PCC Mark II. It's housed in the same offices, populated by the same staff.
Okay.
It really is the same old story.
Okay, let me introduce Steve Coogan, if you don't mind.
The people who are behind it, the people who fund it, are people who have no interest in effective press regulation. Their only interests really are protecting their commercial interests, increasing their profit margins, and any appearance for it to be an effective press regulator are just specious, because, as I say before, they've made a point, and they're rather proud of it, not being Leveson compliant.
OK. Steve Coogan, I have sitting next to me here in the studio the chief executive of IPSO. He's called Matt T. He's been listening to you. He's literally just joined us here. Mr. T, what do you say to Steve Coogan? Talk to him directly when he says, you represent a sham organisation.
I don't represent a sham organisation. I represent an organisation that's doing a very valuable job for the public in investigating complaints and in stopping harassment by publications where that happens.
But you're just the same, this is the criticism, as the old Press Complaints Commission.
I'd say basically the people on my side of the argument don't have any paymasters the way he does. His wages are being paid by the same organisation that is trying to protect their vested interests.
OK, well, let him respond to that.
Anyone. I'm saying this because I believe
let him respond.
No one's paying my wages. No one pays the wages of people in Hacktoff. We're independent people who have a very, very sincere belief in this. And we don't have a big organisation. We don't have deep pockets.
OK, well, let Matt T respond to you, Steve Coogan. Matt T, respond to Steve Coogan.
So we are funded by the press. But that's actually...
That's the key point, isn't it?
It isn't the key point. What Leveson said was...
How can you possibly be independent then?
What Leveson said was that there should be independent self-regulation of the press. The only thing you can do is either have a regulator which is funded by the industry that it regulates, that's a very common arrangement, or you have a regulator that's funded by the public purse. And we believe that it would be wrong to be funded by the public purse. That really would call into question our independence.
Now, in a moment, we'll have a summary of the business news at this hour. But first, let's just bring you the news that a serving West Midlands police officer and 2 other men have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice after an alleged kidnap and terror plot. Police were given information that an officer was going to be kidnapped, which they say turned out to be false and malicious. Well, we can talk to our reporter, Sian Greschek, who joins us live from Birmingham. Tell us more about the background to this.
Well, police received an anonymous call back on the 8th of December saying that a police officer was going to be kidnapped. The police took this threat very seriously. This was at a time when the national threat level was at severe. They sent out an alert to all of their staff. Some 11,500 people work for West Midlands Police. 7,500 of those are serving police officers. The security advice at the time to them was not to wear their uniforms to and from work. Now, as police investigated, they realised that this information was false and malicious. The 3 people that have been arrested are aged 25, 28 and 31, and they're all from Birmingham.
And what more can you tell us about the serving officer who's been arrested?
Well, he's 28 years old. He's a serving police officer in the West and Central Local Policing Unit in Birmingham. He's also been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in a public office and misuse of police systems. The other 2 people that have been arrested have also been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to conduct misconduct in a public office. Now, at the time, a 31-year-old man was arrested. He's now been eliminated from police inquiries and has been deported by border officials. In the meantime, the 3 people that have just been arrested are being questioned by detectives in the anti-corruption unit at West Midlands Police, and I also understand that they're being aided by officers from the counter-terrorism unit as well.
Thank you, Sean. Now an update on our headlines on BBC News. The Defence Secretary Michael Fallon insists an RAF drone strike in Syria, which killed 2 British jihadis, was a perfectly legal act of self-defence. The Greek government has begun ferrying the first of 20,000 people stranded on the island of Lesbos. And Alexander Pacto, the man who murdered Irish student Karen Buckley after meeting her in a nightclub, has been jailed for life.
Hello, I'm Victoria Fritz in the business news this lunchtime. Whitbread, the owner of Costa Coffee and Premier Inn, says it will be raising prices in its hotels and coffee shops to meet the cost of paying its staff the living wage. The minimum wage is set to rise to £7.20 for those aged over 25 from next April and rise steadily over the following 4 years to £9.35. That's far greater than many businesses had predicted. The UK sales figures have been published for August, and it's the worst performance for 2 years. It's all down to the timing of the bank holiday and the wet weather again. More on that in just a moment. And several of Britain's biggest tea brands, including PG Tips, Tetley's and Twinings, have said that they will work to improve the tea estates that they buy from in India after a BBC investigation found dangerous and degrading living and working conditions. Good afternoon. We've had an update on what we've been spending on with the latest figures for August from the British Retail Consortium, and they show that excluding food, sales were actually down 1%. Doesn't sound a lot, but that is actually the worst performance right there since 2013. So let's check out what's been selling and what hasn't. Well, toys have been doing well, and the sales of health and beauty products were also good, but it was a washout summer for the sales of clothing, footwear and furniture, all down on the same time last year, blamed on the wet weather. Helen Dickinson is the Director General at the British Retail Consortium, and she says that the date of the August bank holiday has had a significant impact on these figures, and in fact, things might not be as bad as they suggest.
These figures, they run up to the 29th of August, so there are 2 fairly significant trading days that will fall into September's figures this year, whereas the bank holiday last year included them. And certainly if you think about, people's habits over the bank holidays, back to school is big, so that's one of the main reasons why clothing is down. Larger value items like furniture, that's the sort of spending that people do over that holiday period. So the underlying picture is much more in line with a longer term trend, seeing retail sales growing by about 2% year on year.
How slow can it go? If you've been following the business news over the last few months, you'll know that there are now widespread fears about the state of China's economy. And today, yet more evidence of a slowdown. Imports into the country fell more than 14% in August. And exports, they were also down by 6%. Now, a drop in the figures had been widely expected, as well as second largest economy continues to slow down. But what impact is all of this having on the markets? Let's speak now to Samira Hussain. She's on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.